Schade, dass wir uns das Lied nicht bringen.
Hello, dear audience, wherever you are right now watching, probably from home. I'm happy to welcome here our guest for today's second panel on Can There Be a Global Art? It's already the fourth day of the School of Resistance at the Akademie der Künste in Berlin, and I would like to welcome Rabih Mroué, Milo Rau, and online Lia Rodrigues and Wajdi Mouawad. It's a pleasure that you join our panel today. Perhaps some introductory words about the School of Resistance itself. We conceive it as a place for experts of change who think and rethink our strategies, our methods, and it's a place for discussing what we should be learning and what we should be unlearning. And I think, particularly for the topic of today, this is a good way to start. Also, I would like to refer to the place we're sitting right now. The last couple of days we were discussing a lot tribunals, trials, courtrooms. In many of the works you've done, Milo, this plays a big role. And yesterday, Lara Stahl, in a panel on transnational justice, spoke about her project, Europe on Trial. And somehow, the three of us here and the two of you who are joining, we are putting global art production on trial. We are discussing how we have been operating so far, and what was problematic, and what we might be unlearning and learning in this pandemic situation. Perhaps let me start with introducing our guests. Lia Rodrigues is a choreographer. She studied classical ballet and history at the University of Sao Paulo and worked for several years in Maguire Marin's company in France. In 1990, she founded the Lia Rodrigues Compagnie de Danses. Rodrigues has always combined her artistic work with social commitment, something we will be talking about today. This concern culminated in 2004 in the decision to move the center of her company's work to the Favela Maré on the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro. The cultural center and dance school she founded there is probably one of the topics we will be discussing today. Wajdi Mouawad is a prolific writer of our times, played on many stages, and theatre director. Mouawad directed the Centre National des Arts in Ottawa, Canada from 2007 to 2012, served as an artistic advisor for the Festival d'Avignon, and in the same capacity for the Grand Théâtre Nantes. Mouawad has won several prizes and is since 2016 director of the Théâtre National de la Colline in Paris. And Rabih Mroué, to my right, is director, actor, visual artist, writer. He works at the interface of performance and visual arts. In his performances, he often combines real, everyday material with fictional narratives that he develops himself as an author and writer of his performances, combining aesthetics and political research. And we know each other from, particularly from your work at Münchner Kammerspiele, for instance, Kill the Audience or Ode to Joy, but there are also many other performances, lecture performances with which you have traveled the world, for instance, Sand in the Eyes or Pixelated Revolution. And to my left, Milo Rau, who probably goes with a short introduction. He's the director, artistic director of IPM and Antigent, and has been here at several panels already. Hello to everyone.
Hi.
After this rather long introduction, I would to ask a question to everyone, perhaps starting with you, Wajdi. Where were you when the first lockdown of the arts institutions happened last year?
I was in Strasbourg. I was getting ready to play. I was to perform a show that I had written and that I had directed and that I was also performing in.
And what about you, Lia? unfortunately.
A very beautiful year, full of work that will provide our survival in Brazil, and everything was cancelled. I was actually in France, and I was able to send back in a very tight moment everybody to Brazil, and I stayed in Europe, and I'm here 1 year now out of my home.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
And you, Rabih?
Yeah, I was in Leipzig preparing for a performance with my partner Lina Majdalani. It was actually 1 week before the opening, and we had to go back home to Berlin. So.
And it fits quite well, Lia, what you said about you being stuck here in Europe with what Milo and me probably can narrate about this moment. Perhaps, Milo, you want also to share where you were when all this started.
Lia, I was in the north of Brazil at that very moment in Marabá, starting to rehearse for Antigone there with local actors, and yeah, it stopped. And then somehow over Sao Paulo we could go back in a week to Europe, and then I was stuck in Cologne.
And I myself, to complete the picture, I was in Sao Paulo for a festival. We were showing Femme Fatale of Philippe Ken, and it was really, the theaters were already closed in Europe, but we were still performing. The reason I'm asking, and perhaps Lia, you want to reply to this, is what does this tell about the way we were working before the pandemic? How we were working at different places on a global scale, and perhaps also in which way this might have been problematic, because I perceived this very short period for a festival in Sao Paulo, traveling there, showing it, the technicians don't even see the city and then they return, as something quite problematic, and perhaps now it's the moment to reflect upon this. So how did we work on an international scale before the pandemic, and what was problematic about it? Lia, did you hear the question? Sorry.
Okay, I heard the question. I didn't know that I was me to begin. Bom, is a huge subject, let's say like this.
I agree.
Especially that nowadays we hear a lot of artists that say, let's do something for the environment, not fly anymore. Normally, artists from the north, from rich countries that have a lot of work, that really doesn't need to fly, actually. Né? But we, artists of the south, especially in Brazil, we don't have any money to support our work. All the money is in Europe, in these rich countries. So we have to come here in order to survive there. So this is a tricky thing, but I think we should look a little bit larger to this subject. Not only I am not going to fly, etc., because at least for us from the South, we really need what you have in Europe. You have support, you have a réseau of many artists institutions that we don't have. So how can we survive there without this? And this is I've been doing many years, going in Europe, going back to Brazil, taking money from Europe, you know, the other way around that normally was like this. So take the richness that you have in Europe and take to Brazil to promote art there, to survive there, to make survive not only my artistic work, because this is not the main point in my life, but to make a project in the favela work, art center there, to give a way to living for many people there, to support the dance school with more than 300 students. So we need support and money for this.
I'm sure we will return to this aspect of hacking the system in order to mobilize solidarity. Perhaps to you, Wajdi, also the same question. How did we collaborate on an international scale before the pandemic, and perhaps also what was problematic about it?
come back. On t'entend. We can more or less hear you.
I apologize.
Okay.
Okay. We start again. I was saying that building on what Lia was saying, the question that you asked is a question that can only be posed from the point of view of Europe. You have to be European to ask this kind of question, because indeed it is very complex. Europe is precisely the locus of financial power with regards to artistic creation. And I won't repeat what Lia said, but I will speak from the perspective of Quebec, where I was largely educated, even if now I work largely in France. In Quebec, there is a festival that is very important that you might know. It's the Theatre Festival of the Americas. If that festival hadn't existed, it would have been entirely impossible for artists from Quebec to confront themselves and compare themselves to the global artists. If artists of South America hadn't come to Montreal, if this festival hadn't invited Alain Platel, Nina Gawa, Afghan artists, African artists, South American artists, if these companies hadn't been able to move by plane to Montreal, an entire generation of artists from Quebec would not have been able to evolve. Because Quebec is a small society in terms of population, surrounded in a little island surrounded by Anglophone areas, and we could have ended up dying or becoming somehow incestuous artistically by working together with the same people, by having always the same points of view. And it's due and thanks to the foreign artists that many artists from Quebec have been able to develop their art, because they have been confronted with artistic forms and ideas that were extremely powerful and have been able to call into question their own work of art. If, starting from today, artists stop moving, for all kinds of probably good reasons, artists of the countries that we go to lose the possibility to confront themselves with other art. What is interesting is that if we were having this debate in Montreal, I think that we would not be asking this question.
Rabih, you also said it's a problem, like a complex, difficult question I'm raising.
Yeah, it's difficult because, I think, to answer of how is it going today during the pandemic, we have to go through how it was before, and how it changed. Maybe I don't want to go before. It's just to talk about something. For me, I think it's interesting. Is especially for the first 6 months of the pandemic, there was something very noticeable, and to recognize it is that the center of, as Europe as the center, as Wajdi was saying, it was decentralized with the pandemic. And this has actually created something of global equality in the world. For the first time, for example, in Lebanon, in October, there was a revolution, in October 2019. And then the pandemic came to fading it out, it's repressing it, in addition to the authorities in Lebanon. But at the same time, there was something for the Lebanese fine. I felt it also, is that for the first time we don't feel that we are alone facing this enemy. It's actually the whole world together. And one thing that I would like to talk about is that during a year, maybe more or less, the quality of art and what artists are presenting was not important anymore during this year. What was important is that this solidarity between all the artists and the world, and especially the countries that were really suffering. For example, Italy at that time, it was like a big issue in Europe and in the world. And then Spain and France and, like, of course, a lot of countries. But it was like, for the first time, I felt myself like, it doesn't matter the quality of the work, like if I'm presenting of someone, of like an artist or like a festival, that sometimes I'm not convinced with the quality, or like quality intellectually or like practically. So it was not really important. The important thing is just like to have this solidarity with each other. And this is something we didn't have it before. At least for me, I was all the time questioning all the time why I'm participating in this festival, why they are inviting me, from where the money is coming, should I accept, should not I accept, what is the image that they have about me, why they inviting. All these questions disappeared in the pandemic in a way.
It's interesting that you're raising that, because actually when I was asking the question, I was not so much problematizing the global collaboration on the level of ecological questions, but more, we have here the sentence, decolonize a spectacle. And I felt sometimes that this international form of collaboration, these festivals, as you were saying, why do they invite me? What is the gesture? What is, in which way is it to show something, to exercise something? Or is it just to give a short visibility to something, then to feel better in a bourgeois way, and then to retrace from the question of solidarity? And that's why I'm also problematizing how did we work, and in which forms of production did we perhaps participate with our artistic work. And that perhaps leads also to you, Milo. How do you look back to the time before the pandemic and the international collaboration?
I just to come back what I just heard from Lia and from Wajdi and also from Rabih and from you. It's very interesting how focused you still are, even being in a global system of exchange of art and everything. That I think many people never heard a statement in Europe like the one from Lia now. I didn't read it in any theater journal, this problematization of not flying anymore and not exchanging anymore, and who pays the price for it. Because where is the center of this, all this what you call richness, all this money, and also of the symbolic capital on the schools you can go, and so on and so on. And it's everything in Europe. And of course, it's simple to say in Europe, so now we stay in Europe as we did it for so long time, while the global economy, of course, is continuing and the managers are flying and so on and so on. So I think the first step for me is to, and that's, I think, if I remember well, was also the reason why we started this School of Resistance, to really confront the very limited perspective we can have on global problems by the life, by the milieu, by just the reality, how we construct our knowledge and our practice, to widen it, to open it, and to find then solutions together on a global level. Yeah. So that's what is interesting for me. And of course, I can now talk a lot about how I was starting to think about it, but I think in that way, I'm really a cliché European artist that decided immediately we have to have less touring, we have to have more sustainable forms of producing in my theater in Ghent. And I don't think that this is worthless. Still, I think, but it's only a part of the problem.
I think this will lead us to one of the core questions of what we are trying to understand today, or learning and unlearning. What is our relation to a specific territory, a specific social context in which we are working, and how do we make this visible or mobile in a global context? And I would, in this case, like to start with you, Lia. Perhaps you can tell a bit about, you mentioned the school already, how you work in a specific place, a specific social territory, but at the same time, you travel with your work globally. And how you see the relation between these two poles?
First of all, I have to say that I'm speaking from a very specific place related to Brazil. I am a white woman. I am from middle class. and this means a lot in my country. So I had many privilege that a lot of people they cannot have. So I could be an artist first of all. So I had all my career as a dancer, a choreographer, but I'm very committed since ever with what's happening in my country. Is when I heard about solidarity in times of Corona or even before, I don't see a huge change. And I think the pandemic hit differently in different countries. As you can imagine, the pandemic hit Brazil in a very, very, very hard way. Because we don't have only the pandemic, we are now the second country to have more people dying, and we are in a completely chaos there. So this create a completely different form of solidarity. Of course, we have a lot of solidarity in Brazil. The place where I work, the NGO with whom I work in the favela, made a huge campaign to give just food to people that don't have nothing to eat. 17 families. But you go to your question. So I work and I made my artistic and pedagogical work in this territory. It's a huge favela with 140,000 inhabitants. Is bigger than 8% of the cities in Brazil, and of course, is completely doesn't have many how to say infrastructure for their lives. It's a very hard life, specific more and more now in the pandemic times, but still with violence. But in another hand, they have a very a life, let's say like this. People are able to create, to reinvent themselves, because life for them say every day no, and they have to reinvent themselves and say every day yes to life. So I learn a lot. So I arrived there without a project, but just together with this NGO that is led by people that born in the favela. This is a huge difference also. So together we decided to create Art Center, and we created this Art Center in a huge space that was completely destroyed. We still, the past 10 years, we tried to raise money to make some works there. And then this dance school in 2011, and we have these 300 students for all ages. But it's also where I work, where I made my creations, where I'm always in this very specific place that I have to ask questions myself every day. What I'm doing there, I have to have a radical listening to people that lives there. And to speak about my relation with Europe, as I said in the first question, that I have the support of many institutions in Europe, luckily. Otherwise, I would not able to follow my work. I don't know in which way I will follow my work. So I try to, because when I am in Brazil, I have to deal with this specific territory that ask me many questions. But when I arrive in Europe with my work also, I'm seen as a Latin American artist, and it's very complicated and complex and very interesting to be in these two places all the time, traveling from one to the other.
Thank you. Perhaps also the same question to Wajdi: how does the specific place we work in relate to the way we collaborate on an international level, and also combining it perhaps with a question from the audience? How can we deconstruct a European-centered solidarity and instead create a decolonial solidarity?
Global. Mm.
Global.
I can, of course, only speak from the point of view that I am speaking from. As opposed to Lia, I am in the entirely opposed situation. Everything that I do as an artist, for instance, if we speak about my artistic work, everything that I do, everything that I have written, everything, absolutely everything that I do, I always address the Lebanese. I write plays starting from Lebanon. I begin with this exile. Nonetheless, all the plays that I have done, that I've written them with actors that are not Lebanese. I have worked with actors in Quebec for spectators in Quebec, because theater is particular in that, as opposed to cinema, a theater play is for the spectators that are roughly 3 miles around the theater. 90% of the spectators live close to the theater, not far away. So this is the people that you address. All the while, everything that I talk about talks about an injury that has occurred in a country that is thousands of kilometers away. I myself, therefore, I'm always decentered. I never live in the place from where I write. I don't live in my emotional territory. I live in other territories. And everything I write it together with artists that do not know anything about the situation that I describe. I keep describing the war in Lebanon to actors in Quebec. I have to transmit this to them so that they can carry the work. And there's not only the actors, but there's also the spectators. So I am telling to spectators who are not concerned by this question that is far away from them. Only once have I had the opportunity to go perform these plays in Lebanon. This was the only time in my life where I had the impression that those that I write for heard me. The rest of the time, I'm entirely decentralized. So my relationship to territory is rather paradoxical. Right now, I'm directing the theater Théâtre de la Colline that is situated in Paris, in a very popular, down-to-earth area. It used to be called the Theater of the Parisian East. It's still a working-class area of Paris, a little bit. And currently, I am in the process of rehearsing a performance that takes its starting point with an explosion that has occurred in Beirut, and I do this with French actors, and I spend my day asking myself the question how I can make sense of what I want to narrate here to a spectator whose story this isn't at all. How can I, when I write, when I direct, open up the theater? For example, at the moment, the situation that we're in right now, which is that we're not performing, I've decided to open the rehearsals. They're open all the time. Every day, people that I don't know at all come. It's very limited. There's about 10 people. They come, they sit down, and they watch us rehearse. And that is the way that I have found to share this lucky situation that we are in, that we can be rehearsing and can be working. So I'm staging a story that doesn't regard the people that come and watch at all. But as soon as somebody sits in the theater space, I start looking at them, I start looking for what I see in their eyes, and I start to shift a little bit what I'm doing. I have never asked myself the question why I was invited to the countries that I was invited to. I'm so busy with how to create a relation between a spectator that lives right next to the theater with a story that happens so far away from him. My problem for the past 30 years has so often been that I am not really addressing the audience that I would like to address. That when somebody says, I want your show to come to our festival, I want it to travel, I say, sure, fine, I'm very happy. But it doesn't really console me because I find myself performing in Spain and Germany. I'm happy because I know that it reaches people, but the audience that I would want to address to, I am never addressing. It's as if Lia was doing choreographies, but was never presenting them in Marais, where she lives. As if she was presenting them everywhere in the world, except for in this favela. And this creates a relationship to the world that is rather strange. When I hear words during the pandemic, such as mutant, the virus has muted, or there's variation, I always feel like like one is talking about myself. I'm a mutant, I'm a variant when I started leaving my country. And I keep being a variant, and I can't return to the center.
Thank you very much for that, for sharing that. And I'm sure and curious that Rabih, you have plenty to react hearing all this.
Hey, plenty, okay. First of all, like to come to this question, how like to deconstruct the European centered solidarity. It's just like I'm wondering, like, it's first of all, how can I, like, as a Lebanese, coming from countries where like there are wars and catastrophes, like a region which is still in conflicts, etc. How, like, first of all, how I can convince the Europeans, if we are talking about the Europeans, but also the global, the world, not to look at me as a victim, not to reproduce me again as a victim. So if I want to come to a festival, not because I'm a victim, because this is actually the problem, where whenever there's a catastrophe, the world runs to and like open the microphones, the cameras for those people to bring them and invite them, and money goes there to produce for them. But what they want from them, they want them as victims, not as an active agents, yes. So whenever they become active agents, they are not welcome at all. You have to fight for this. You have to resist all the time for this. And it's not an easy thing for those countries that are coming from the margin, from poor countries where there are like conflicts. And a lot of artists, if I want to say like the majority of the artists from these countries paid the price in the two senses. Either they paid the price that they are excluded, they are not invited at all, or they accept the game and they produce themselves as victims. And they are become like stars or like invited everywhere, etc. Very, very few people, maybe they resisted this and they succeeded to find a place. I don't know.
And if I may ask, is there something about the production structures and also the structures of the finance behind? What kind of sharing, what kind of art production is being financed? Do we have a very short-lived spectacle, and we are not really interested in engaging in a? There's
agendas all the time in people who organize things, who has the power to organize things, people who have the money to organize things. They have agendas all the time, most of the time, and they have to fulfill this agenda. So of course, they have to look where they can find things, works, people that they can fit their agendas. And those who doesn't fit, they are not there. It's simply as this. It's very violent. Really, it's very violent. And the agenda is all the time changing. There are some people very clever they can like play with this agenda. I mean, like from outside. Yeah. And also from the inside, it's like a double also. It's also from the center also, it's a problematic. It's not only for the margin, because also this agenda is also the issue also is that they don't create their agendas also. It's also there are someone who is giving this agenda and giving the money according to this agenda. And it's all the time, you have to, this is why like I'm saying like I'm all the time skeptical, doubtful. I'm all the time afraid to participate in whatever festival. I don't say that I succeed to have like a good selection or like to, no, of course no, because like it's a big machine going on. It's really, but I'm always skeptical, always questionable about this.
I think this concept of agenda setting is very interesting also in the context of your work, Milo. And also in this context, I wanted to mention the book and also the work you've done around the concept of global realism. And perhaps this has something to do also with setting agendas and creating work context of your own.
Yeah, I want perhaps to come on something that Rabih was saying, because what for me is very interesting, there's an economy of compassion, I think, in the art sector, in the bourgeois art sector, that you would be invited, as you said, because you are a victim of a conflict, or you lived the conflict, you have a special biography. And some years ago, or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I made a play, Compassion, what was exactly about why are you always exposed as a victim, and why is there this kind of struggle of being a victim even in places where are no victims, you know, somehow when you enter the art sector, and why is there this place in society? And that's for me, as a Marxist, the most scaring part, where being a victim is good, while in all the other places it's a huge problem.
Right.
And you can't capitalize it. You can only capitalize it in these festivals. And why did we create this economy of compassion and of being a victim, and you go around in the world, and why does it exist? Why did we create this counter world, which is somehow where we give agency to people that when they step one step aside don't have any more, you know? And we have never-ending discussions about what is the percentage of agency in that room, and I think that room in general is wrong. The way how we represent, it becomes now a bit, let's say, general, I know, but how we represent the world in art perhaps is wrong. Perhaps we have to find other ways of representation. As Wajdi described and as Lia described it, like on really landing somewhere, or really accepting the exile, or really trying to do activism and not art, or really just working on your stuff and I'm not interested in including however, you know, kind of rejecting all this neoliberal like tolerance, inclusion, agency, and question the things. And what would it mean? Because they are all beautiful concepts, but what would it mean basically? And then we come to the global realism. How can you change actually a system where you have a parallelity of global exploitation and global compassion? How can you kind of reflect on what you would like to do as an artist and then is intellectual into real, let's say, for example, the distribution of a work, the kind of how you produce a work, how the institutions are done, where you work to do it. And I think the only thing we can do at the very moment is criticizing it, is perhaps somehow escaping it. But for me personally, is really to, and that's why I think what Lia does and what Wajdi does is for me beautiful to say, okay, we land on that place, on atterri, and there we try to do a work that is really senseful and has a time and has its own complexity, which is incredible, you know. And you try to decolonize, I mean, your neighborhood somehow. And I think that's what I'm also interested in the very moment, to say, okay, what is this project? What is this actually? But I'm less exposed to it than you, Rabih, because as Wajdi, I became the director of a huge institution, or not so huge, but still a city theater. So I have some chances to reconstruct it, limited, but still they are there. And I have a neighborhood, you know, even if I'm not from Belgium and etc. I want to add one thought. about, because we are always talking about Europe, and I think Europe is colonized too. I mean, you have to go to South Italy, to South Spain, to Eastern Europe, to wherever, and you will find a totally other Europe than in these festivals or in Berlin or in Paris, of course. So there is no Europe that is kind of colonizing the world. We are all the time colonizing ourselves.
Which is exactly also, I would refer also to the same point for also Wajdi that was saying like about the audience in Lebanon, Wajdi, is that also this is something, because I lived there most my entire life there, but also I didn't feel that I'm reaching the real audience in Lebanon. I was like, it was a very, very limited audience, and the rest are like, you cannot reach them, and they are like, we are in a valley, as we say, and they are in another valley. This is a Lebanese expression. So just like to say, like, yes, really, when you go from one part to another part in the same country, you can find that there is like also the power game is there, and it's violent. How like they exclude each other, or like how they do like this violence relation and repressing each other. So,
I mean, there's definitely a construction of centrality and periphery and gravity and margins going on all the time. And perhaps this leads me back to one of the questions we had at the very beginning, Lia, when you somehow showed how important it is to hack the system, to mobilize resources for other communities, but also perhaps for other forms of art. Perhaps you can go a bit into this question of how we should be hacking this system in order to really mobilize resources and solidarity.
I don't know, but I have some things that I want to say about victims, for example. I don't see us Brazilians as victims. Also, I don't see myself victimized. I don't know how to say this in English. I think we have a huge knowledge in Brazil, especially, indigenous people, Black people, people from the periphery. They don't feel themselves victims. Of course, living in a country as we live, that each 23 minutes a young Black boy is killed, makes the whole difference from everything that you do, art or not art. So this is one thing. Then I would like to speak about audience. I present my works always in Maré since the beginning. I stayed there for 1 month, playing 5 days a week. And this is very important for me. And there is no difference from the audience in Europe and the audience there in Maré. So I try to really stay in this place, showing my work as an artist and be make social projects and art projects. But then to come to, and also to say that I know very well that the Europe that I'm referring is not the Europe that is the poor Europe, is of course where the money is concentrated. And I know that Europe is not only one. But can you repeat your question, please? Because I lost myself in my own.
No, at the beginning you were referring to how important it was that international travels were possible, because then coming to Europe, hacking the system, earning the money, and then that enabled again work back in Brazil, that this procedure was also something to mobilize resources. And you said how important it was and how difficult that it stopped. So in which way can we transform or hack the system in place in order to really enable a different form of global collaboration?
I think we have first of all, we have to have a radical listening for different voices. We have to step out of our center. It's my work. I can do it. I want to. If I can do my work, I have the right to do my work in the way I believe. I think we have to step out and leaves other voices that there is no place for these voices nowadays and since long time. I think this is a radical listening, open. The place you have, if you have a lot of power in your career, you can step out a little bit and give place to others. Is what I try to do. Very little, but I think everybody can invent different forms to wreck the system. I don't know if I'm wrecking the system. I just do what I need to do, what I see in front of my eyes, what is a necessity. I cannot do differently. Sometimes I struggle with my career as an artist. If I am an artist or I'm doing social projects, but I let these questions float a little bit in order to go on. I'm a very practical person. I have to build something concrete. So I try to deal with all my questioning about all these things, but to follow building, concrete. So space, the school, my work, and go there. Follow to raise money. I'm raising money to the roof that is falling down nowadays. So I'm very concrete because I think this is what my country asks me. So I'm trying to answer with my work as an artist, but also with very concrete actions.
Wajdi, probably being like in the place of centrality like Paris, the way we have to operate is a bit different. So I would be curious about what you say, what we have to unlearn. For instance, directing a European arts institution.
This is a very good question. For me, at least, the conclusion that I have reached with regards to this pandemic is that what I have to learn right now, and what I will say is not just an idea, it will have very concrete consequences. What I need to learn is to create outside of institutions. I have to get out of the institutions entirely. I don't only need to stop directing those institutions, but I need to create outside of the institutions and independently of them. And since I don't know yet what that means and how to do this, you know, it's not very complicated. Political power definitely needs to know two things. One, what are doing its scientists and what are its artists doing, because those are the two areas of research. As long as through a system of financial support, demands from artists to explain and present its projects, as long as you need to say, I will do this and that, I will do this for the youth, etc., etc., the politician looks at this and says, ah, this is a nice kid, this is a good kid, he's interesting, he's not dangerous, this is all right. The same is done to academics and scientists in the domain of research. This means that the political world, even if they're not aware of it, they absolutely need to know what artists and scientists are doing. And for me, this is also a kind of a framework that you have to fit in. You go to school, art school, then you found a company, and you continue to enter in this machinery that is institutionalized. At a certain point, you start directing institutions, and you don't always ask yourself the right questions, those questions that Rabih has mentioned. Why am I invited? You are maybe honored or flattered, you want to go. And it's also marvelous to hear that you are loved. An important director tells you as an artist, I love you, and you think, thank you so much, of course I'm going. Everything that I'm saying now, I'm talking only about me, of course. But I've realized that which made me start writing is that when I was a young man and I was unknown, I wasn't part of any institution. I was just at home dreaming, having ideas. And this thing is very important to me. The pandemic has led me to ask myself, what would happen if you started creating outside of institutions? And since I didn't get an answer, I don't know exactly how to do it. Structurally, economically, I don't know how to. I don't know how to organize that kind of work. So I wonder if not, maybe this might be the most interesting approach. Maybe, to be very concrete, maybe I don't need to prolong my contract as a director of the Théâtre de la Colline. Maybe if I'm offered the direction of another institution, even if it's flamboyant, maybe I have to say, no, I'm not taking it. Maybe I have to get out of the institutions. And to answer the question of decolonization and of a new interrogation, I think that it is impossible to answer to that from a situation such as the one that I am in. I cannot answer this question if I don't make my body the answer to this question. I can't respond to this question and continue working for a space that gives me a salary, that gives me a space and means to work. This would be hypocritical. I have to get out of the institution first to really begin a renaissance of my relationship with this thing that I love most in the world, which is creating.
You mentioned and explained both what it means to be in an institution and the hypocrisy, the difficulties of transforming, and what it means to be outside of an institution. Milo, I would like to bring that to you because you said that you are artistic director of NT Ghent, and you started with a very specific manifesto, the Ghent Manifesto at the beginning. So this is a way to, from the start, from scratch, transform the institution. But you also operate a lot outside the institutions on purpose, probably. So perhaps, what is the difference in operating in these two systems? Where is the hypocrisy and where are the opportunities?
When I became artistic director of NT Ghent 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, it was my first fixed contract ever. And my mother was very happy that I finally had, with more than 40 years, a contract. And it's true that it's just true that especially now in the times of Corona, it gives you safety. You know that you will not be kind of lost if you can't produce. You can even afford to not produce. You can even say, let's produce and not sell. You can do a lot of things if you are in an institution. On the other side, I would like to question a bit what Wajdi is saying, that you can't be let's say, that it is impossible to decolonize institutions from the inside. So that's, I mean, perhaps I shorted too much, but I don't think it 100% and don't even think it in your case, Wajdi, because what you are doing in the Théâtre de la Colline is somehow decolonizing the institution, how you work, how you invite the public, what public you invite, what work you do, how you tour it, and so on. So you can use, I'm not anti-institutional, so how you use institutions is really, and sometimes it means, like in the Ghent Manifesto, really explode it. So we don't have the white classicals anymore, we don't have this ensemble that can only play Shakespeare because it's made of old white men and old white women, and they can only play Shakespeare because and Chekhov. So we have to have kind of a decolonized ensemble and so on. And that you, of course, by purpose invite other people, or we try, for example, when we go to Mosul, it's not to know more about Mosul like journalists would do, but it's, and we will talk about this evening, it's to invest at least 20% of our budget in creating a film institute there together with the Academy of the Arts of Mosul. So it's what we have in the point 8 of the manifesto, saying you have to land every year somewhere with your big European institutions outside this institution, not invite people, but just bring cultural infrastructure somewhere somewhere else and then leave it there, as we did it with the Congo tribunal. I think privileges and being an institution is also something that, for me, it would be hypocritical to not work with it and to not use it in the way we do, and as we have access. And perhaps we are only the second generations of leftists that have access to this kind of institutions. It's not so common too that from the off scene you can enter these institutions. We should use it and we should transform them. And sometimes they are stronger than we are, and then we have to be strategic. And at the moment when I understand that I am, let's say. I arrived on a position where what I say and what I do is completely disconnected, and not only a bit disconnected as it might be in every life. Then I would also stop it, and I have to say too. Now I met Wajdi again. That of course, all 1-2 months, I am thinking tomorrow I stop it. I'm somehow not strong enough, you know. I'm not bureaucratic enough to do this struggle. But still, I'm going on, and we will see how it ends.
Somehow, I would turn it around. The day you notice you wouldn't be prepared to stop, you should stop, because then, if the attractiveness of being part of the institutions and the system is so big.
No, I mean it's the economy of love. Actually, when you are on the head of an institution, when you are in an institution, it's like when you are all the time in a festival. And you are surrounded by a kind of a microcosmos where you are somehow loved and you are somehow needed. And I think that's for many people a reason why you would work in a group. It's also the description of solidarity. It's also beautiful. We don't have only to criticize it. But of course, in the moment when you understand to be loved is more important than to do your job, perhaps it's dangerous. I don't know. I can end with a quote of Bertolt Brecht that I like a lot. He said, "When there is city A where there is a necessity and the people needs me, and there is a city B where people loves me, I would prefer to live in city A." And I think that's perhaps the answer on your question.
To add a footnote, since we mentioned the Ghent Manifest, which of the 10 commandments is your favorite?
I hope you ever read this, but it might be completely mysterious what we are talking about now. I have actually and I found it again with Wajdi and also with Lia. I think it's the second one. Theatre is not a product, it is a production process. Research, castings, rehearsals and related debates must be publicly accessible, so that you don't work for premieres and then you open up and you show the premiere. But the premiere is just one day in your life of having an exchange. And that's why we have, all rehearsals are open, and I think it's my favorite.
Rabih, probably there are different things that have been mentioned you want to react to, but I add one more question and then you can pick your path. Because I wanted to ask you, the title we gave to this conversation, "Can There Be Global Art?" is of course, we use it in a way to make it, like to problematize it. This concept of the global sphere and the global art. So do you think that this is a misleading concept, a problematic concept, a wrong conception of exchange?
It's I don't know. I just find it problematic, to be honest. It's like to think global or even to think local. I don't know, like like you are like in a way creating like kind of a binaries, which is like, I think like I'm interested in actually in the process, as you said with this statement in your manifesto, is like the process, the research, the way of thinking and reflecting upon things. And I'm a person who actually insists, like, if you want to do a work about a topic, that you don't go for generalization, just to go for the global, huh? So it's like, for me, is like, as much as you are precise, as much as you go into the details of the details, like as Wajdi and Lia all the time, they are insisting that when we talk, we're talking about ourselves, our conditions. It's not about like representing Brazil or Sao Paulo or like whatever artist. No, I'm talking about myself. But like when I talk about the wars or the war, there are like, if the war with a big capital, it's problematic. So which war we are talking about? It's about this war that happened in that day, at that moment, in that place, not any war. And then you can find all the political background, the social background, everything around it, dig inside it, around it, in order to talk about it. And I don't mind if the audience could grasp the details, the nuances or not. It's fine. I think this is also something some artists, and I don't want to generalize, but also there are some also producers, they are always afraid that, but the audience will not understand. We have to make like footnotes or like a glossary or introductions. This is, I think, this is it's in a way they underestimate the audience. They think that they are clever than the audience, or the artist is clever than the audience, or like I know and they don't know, and I'm here to teach them, or like to give them knowledge about my country or this event or whatever. I think this is a problematic issue. I think like when I do a work, I do it and I presented it in Beirut as I presented it in Berlin, as it is in Japan, Tokyo, or wherever. The same without any changings. And I always have the same feeling that people can understand, and even if in Tokyo they will miss a lot of the nuances because they don't know the history of my country, if I'm talking about my country, which is fine, but they know the history of their country very well, which I don't know. And they can make associations with what I'm talking about, with their histories, with their own experience. And then exactly it's the representation or the presentation and the performance itself, the opening itself, is not that important as much as the encounter after. When we start to discuss and to give a dialogue, to make a dialogue, and then do this exchange. So the performance that you present is a kind of sharing with the audience something. And then they share with you with other thing. And this is how I see it. So it's global, local. I don't know.
The show is also one step in this process. All of you are
of course
stressing this.
Of course, it's for me. It's for me. I do like 3 phases. This is how I see the process of like creating or like doing a work. Better than using the word creating. I don't like it. Doing a work, an artwork. It's in 3 phases. The first phase, when you work alone or with a group, with the process, with the research, etc., which you don't think about your audience. You don't know to whom you are addressing it. Actually, you are addressing it to yourself, to the people you are working. We are thinking, you are provoking yourself, you are questioning yourself, you are pleasing yourself. It's your pleasure, it's your torturing, it's all of this. Huh? Then the second phase is when you share this. When you see like, okay, this moment I want to stop it because it's endless research. It can go on. So let's stop it here and share with the audience what I have now. So this is the performance. And the third phase is the very important one, when you start to meet with the audience as individuals, when each one of them has a voice, has a political presence, and everyone has the ability to articulate her own ideas and questions and thoughts, and the debate that comes out of it. So it's when you come back to this equality with the audience.
For instance, in Münchner Kammerspiele, with your work Kill the Audience, there was always an after talk to every performance, and the after talk was really sometimes an hour. It was almost as long as the performance itself, because everyone was so engaged in discussing.
Right.
We talked a lot about processes. You mentioned how important it is for you. Wajdi also explained that he's now inviting audience to the rehearsals. Lia, so I would like to ask two questions to you. One is, how is the artistic process when you work in the studio, in the dancing school, and also how is the process with the specific people you're working with and the rest of the people around? And the second question, because all of you mentioned audiences, and I'm quite glad that we're talking about this, and I would also be interested because you said something about the audience there, but how do you feel the interaction with audiences when you travel to festivals? Is there any form of engagement, as Rabih was asking for?
So I was thinking about when Rabih was speaking about this meeting with the audience. Centro de Artes da Maré, where I work, there is no doors. The door are open because also it's very hot.
Lovely.
You cannot close. The only place that can a little bit the fresh air can enter. So a lot of people enter during the rehearsal. A lot of young students that pass by and they want to drink water. We have drinking water inside. Or sometimes these people, crack people that lives in the streets, sometimes they enter then and they are inside my rehearsal. I have to stop many times during my when I'm doing a piece, because many things happens at the same time. So I think this is the first meeting with a kind of audience, because they are very curious always. As we have two spaces and many activities are in the other space, there is also no door. So a lot of students from the dance school or other things that we do, they visit us during the rehearsal, etc. So there is a real interaction. And with the audience, as we play, sometimes we have a lot of conversations after, and sometimes before the piece. Sometimes when you have, for example, naked bodies in the piece, can be problematic inside the favela, but not always. But we have to a little bit talk about it before. And after also, because people come to you to see, and before, as there is no this relation as in the theater that is separate. They are there, we drink or eat together. It's always this thing that eat together before the performance and after the performance. So before, I have to, come on, we are going to begin our performance. We use the same toilet to change our clothes and for the audience. So we have a really interaction like this. And when I go to theaters in Europe, of course, it's completely different. First, to set up a piece that was created in this space in a black box or in another space, for me, sometimes I struggle because I miss the hitting, I miss the noises, I miss the life that is interacting all the time with me. But then I learn with years to accept the silence, accept the conditions that I have that also add to my piece. They transform my piece, of course. And I have pleasure to be also in this space. And I love to talk with the audience after all my performance, because I think this is part of my performance. Also because to make a point with the beginning of our conversation when I mention ecology, because decolonizing is not far from ecology. It's completely linked. These two concepts is very important for me, at least, to think the world from this perspective. And so I bring, as I fly from very far, I have to meet these people. I have to try to listen them and to give information to this other part of the world, like a letter. I feel myself as a letter. to address and to bring all these voices that cannot travel, they cannot sometimes express themselves, because I speak not very well English, but I speak very well French, so I can address people in another way. So this for me is the beautiful part of my life as an artist, is to be with completely different people and talking and listen. I love this.
There's a question I would like to raise to Wajdi, because now we talked at the very beginning, and I don't think that we have to go too much into detail in which way global collaborations have come to a halt in this pandemic time. But perhaps to talk briefly about the function arts could have right now, because we are very restricted in our ways of work, but still precisely now to understand the situation we're living in, or to deal with the vulnerability and also the healing that it's needed, perhaps with all the suffering that the pandemic also inflicts. What could be the role, function, the art space in these pandemic times?
I believe that the role is to resist to the social attraction. I believe that we have to become a social agent. We have all different tendencies. Some artists are metaphysical, pure artists. They have to stay that way. They have to be trustful to themselves, and they can't have the feeling that if they don't, they stop being artists. There's other artists for whom the presence of the social is very important, and this is very good too. What I rather think is dangerous at the moment is this injunction. One has to be social, one has to help people. Yes, that's true, but it's maybe not everybody's function. Not everybody has this affinity. You know, maybe in 10 years there will be a different pandemic, a virus, and when this virus hits, one will realize that the only possible way of healing it is a performance. It's like Tarkovsky's Solka, and this is the vaccination against this virus. There's no other type of vaccine. All scientists say there's no vaccine, and suddenly some guy suddenly realizes, I realized that somebody who was really ill with this new virus went to a show, he saw the performance, and then suddenly he was healed. And then suddenly everybody realizes that metaphysical, unsocial artists are the vaccine for this virus. What will we do then? We will not be able to be Tarkovsky, all of us. We will not be able to improvise Hölderlin, each and every one of us. But what we can do is to not be wrong about yourself, to not lie to yourself about who you are, and not to start telling each other stories, saying artists should do this or should do that. I have absolutely no idea. I just know that I have to ask myself, what is my language? And I can't betray my language. How do I write? From where do I write? There is this citation from Hölderlin, says, what use are poets in times of need? This is a phenomenal question today, especially since in France everything is closed. Malls are open, museums are closed. It's absurd, because you could walk around in a museum like you walk around in a mall, but museums are closed. Churches are open, but theaters are closed. There's no logic to that. So the logic is that the government has decided that since it can't open everything, it has chosen. And it has chosen to close down culture and art in order to be able to open churches and malls. So what use are artists in times of need? If I asked the government who is taking the decisions it's taking right now, they would answer, they aren't really very useful. So starting from there, the temptation that I feel is to think I have to help, I have to do this and that we artists all start doing kind of the same things. By contrast, I say this all the more since I feel a dichotomy between myself and what is happening. My own language is a dichotomy. I'm not a social artist, socially engaged artist. I keep telling stories. I'm a narrator. I do very classical theater with replicas, with stage directions, with set design and decor changes. I'm a really classical guy, so I will not start changing now and stop being myself because suddenly I have to do something else. I think it is very important to not betray oneself and to not go wrong on oneself, to not change your own language, but to make it even more precise instead of starting speaking a language that is not at all your own.
For sure, that the whole question of how art institutions are allowed to operate or not in this time would be a whole new debate. And I mean, we could share very similar stories from Germany. But since we are now talking about the pandemic situation, Milo, and you, as we heard at the beginning, when the pandemic started, you were in Brazil, you were working with your Antigone in the Amazonas. And probably this was since then 1 year passed and many reflections have been hunting all of us. What do you think did you learn or unlearn in the face of the pandemic regarding your practices?
I think one thing that Wajdi is very right is that it's all a question of talent and of character. I mean, you are a good social worker and you are perhaps a bad artist, or you're a good artist and a very bad social worker. And sometimes it comes together and somebody needs silence to work. For example, Marguerite Duras, she needed complete silence, and if there was one sound, she couldn't concentrate anymore. And others need a lot of people present. For example, myself, if I enter a space where is nobody waiting for something, at least 5 people, for me it's difficult to have one thought. I can't think alone, you know? I can't sit at home. I always need a collaboration, a public, somebody who would think together with me, who would be in dialogue. So I learned a lot about my dependence from it, and I think, and perhaps I generalized too much, the dependency from theater from it, or from art from it. That you would have somebody who is in front of you. And then I started thinking, because of course the government says you can't go back to your theaters, but why don't we play outside? You can't play in artificial light inside, so let's play in real light outside. Let's have this kind of discussions if this is the only possibility that I can meet with all of you in one room. For example, I started in the last year to talk to much more people and much more different people than before. Even the idea of this School of Resistance was born because it was impossible to invite our Antigone, Kaisara, to the Wiener Festwochen, the Vienna Festival. So we said, okay, let's do it online. And I think you've searched other ways of communication, and I hope that these channels, these solidarities, stay alive when we don't need it anymore, or that we still make this kind of meetings, even if we could have 10,000 meetings here in Berlin, you know? For me, the beginning of this discussion was the most interesting moment, because it was really like everybody in this round was saying the complete opposite what I think you were expecting that would be said. I don't know. Yeah. But that everybody would say, yeah, stop flying, stop. Because if you would have 5 people from Europe here, it would have been a discussion, and then let's count the CO2 and et cetera, et cetera. So nobody would reflect on the kind of the inequality that it is in this kind of let's say, upper class ecological view on the international distribution of art.
But in a way, you could also argue that it's precisely the experts of change and those that can land, atterrir in a specific social terrain, that those should be the ones traveling. So that's what I would completely agree with what Lia said, that if someone is flying and if someone is creating a footprint, ecological footprint, it should be these kind of people that have this talent or this expertise.
Yeah, by the way, the flights are full with managers. I mean, you said the churches are open, but also the airports are open. So it's completely absurd. I mean, what we are talking here, that we want to cut down culture while everybody is continuing to distribute inequality all the time. And we can be distributors of equality somehow, of solidarity. I mean, that's a bit naive, but that's, I think, our role. And I think what Wajdi said, to be precise in what we know to do. And if you are, I was healed so many times by Pasolini. By the way, I was healed many times by Hölderlin. I'm a bit afraid that nobody would expect this, that I say that. But because I'm not the guy who would write a big elegy, and I'm not the guy who would do a play with many stage directions. So it's not my talent, but I love it, you know. And everybody has to be precise in his field, and that's what has to be distributed. And if we cut the preciseness of Wajdi and of Lia and of Rabih, and we say just, okay, we can't fly anymore, then what will be distributed then?
I think this also brings me already to a final round of questions to all of you. A bit in the direction you were also mentioning the question of solidarity. So in regards to solidarity, in regards to cooperations, exchange, also on a global scale, what are your fears and your wishes for the future after the pandemic? If on the one side, if we could imagine the world as we would like to have it, but also the fears we have, because I myself, I think at the moment, because many people say now is the time to find answers, I'm more afraid of not finding a question than of not finding an answer at the moment. So perhaps, what is the world we would like to imagine for the time after pandemic, Rabih? Regarding our practices as artists that travel.
Seriously, I have no answer about this. For me, like it's a crisis and it's a period that it's of course important to reflect upon it and to see what comes out of it, what we can learn out of it. Yeah, because like there's a lot of things happening in terms, like if we are talking about live performances, and this is specifically what is important now. If we are all like doing dance, theater, performances, like this is an issue that now we are losing. Like if you do films or videos, of course you miss to show it in a cinema, but you can still do films in the same way as before, or videos, or like an artwork, a painting, but like theater, where like there is a space, a venue where people are gathering. This is what we lost, but also what we gain. I think we lost. There is something not only negative. There is some positive things to think about it, with the relation with the audience and the performer. I personally experienced this because I performed online before the pandemic.
You're an exception.
No, it's maybe I'm exception, but like really I did the performances where like I was talking to a camera and like hidden in a theater, but hidden. And I have to speak to the audience, and the audience didn't know that I'm doing this live. They thought that it is a video recorded, but then they discovered that it's live. But I also, at the beginning, it was like really suffering, like how to perform to a lens. So there's no audience. You have to perform to a lens. Huh? It's exactly what's happening now with Wajdi and Lia. Now we are lucky we are not in the same situation. You're looking to this lens, and you have to. We have to imagine also the audience. Hopefully there are audience, but maybe not.
We wouldn't notice.
But this is actually this is what is important. There is something like there is a freedom for the audience, more freedom for the audience than before, which I really think about it a lot. Like this freedom, that this situation when you perform online. Of course, you lose this the chaleur, the warmness, the bodies together, but also you gain something like now people can watch a performance in their beds. They can watch it while they are eating and drinking. They can even go to the toilet. Like it's a crazy thing. It's really great for the audience. It's really great for us. I don't know. Maybe it's bad. Because also I have to say, like I had a dream, long time, it's like a nightmare actually, I always had it, and then suddenly it happened to me now in the pandemic, which like I always think, because I always want to perform and put the light off for the audience. Actually, if someone wants to sleep, don't feel embarrassed. So I don't see him, I will not be bothered, and he will not, or she will not be bothered. But always I have this fear that maybe when the light on, I will see no audience at all. Everybody left. And this happened to me online, actually, when I was performing one day, and I was like doing very well my role. Really, I was so happy. And when I'm done, then I switched because I was sharing my screen. Yeah. So I switched on, and I discovered that the connection was cut. There was no connection. I was performing for nobody at all. And the funny thing that, as usually happens all the time when there is a technical thing, people think that it is part of the performance. So they thought that it's part of the performance, and they continued without me discussing between themselves, what does it mean that he disappeared now? But it's crazy. So I'm just telling anecdotes, but I have nothing to add.
Perhaps then to you, Lia, what are your expectations, but also your fears regarding global exchange in regards to our practices? And how we can share our work in different places of the world, and also regarding the attempts of solidarity that we talked so much about.
Because on one hand, I am I have many fears, the real fears I feel in my body, because I have to go back home next week. To a country that is very high contamination. So I have concrete fears. I'm part of the population that is in the risk because of my age. No hospitals. So I have fears about my children if they are grow up. I have fears about how to make, I don't know, to make creations. I never try to make in a different way. The work of dance for me is together, very close with a lot of people. I love to work with a lot of people together. So I really don't know how to solve any of these problems. So when you ask this question to me now, I can be very nervous because I am in this moment of going back and not knowing how to begin my work. I have to think for what I have to say. Maybe is I hope we are more aware about the complexity of our life, our humanity, our responsibility to the planet, to the other, to the difference. And we have to learn to live with the trouble, because things are not going to be good. I don't have this dream. I know that's going to be very bad, but not for me. Maybe in the first time, of course, the first person who will suffer is the poor, indigenous people, for example. So, how can we live with the trouble, as Donna Haraway asked these questions in her beautiful book? Is the question that I ask myself every day. How make this present moment more possible? I'm someone that works in a very small world, because I don't have time to think too much bigger. Otherwise, I'm not able to do my work there in this specific place with these specific people around me. So I think I try to not think about your question in my daily life, not think at all. Otherwise, I cannot move. And I need to move. I need to move to survive and to make other people survive. I feel this responsibility. I cannot avoid this part of myself.
Then perhaps, Milo, you want to continue? What is your perspective or your hopes and your fears for the time with and after the pandemic regarding your artistic work and the conditions under which we will operate?
I was working quite, I have to say, quite fast before the pandemic, and this was somehow stopped. And I started to develop, I don't know, another rhythm, I think, during this time, and that's for me I mean, I can't expand too much about it. It's quite logic. So for example, I felt again like a student in this time, and I was doing projects and not knowing if they will happen. And I found out that that's why I made art, not to have a premiere and to always land, but to be in the state of developing, of sharing, of trying out. You called it this kind of research phase when you are torturing yourself, because I describe it if it only would be fun, but it's also quite strong, because it's also a relief to finally bring it out. And but to be confronted more to this and to give, and we come now to the institutions again, to perhaps more build places where you could do so. Myself, others, and so on, and that this is what it is about. And I hope, and I do what I can with the little influence we have, to make that possible. That not this kind of produce the next tour parallelly, that this craziness changes. And yeah, that's what I learned out of it personally.
And finally, dear Wajdi, what is your outlook regarding our practices, our forms of engagement with others, with other artists in other places after the pandemic? And perhaps also, what are your fears regarding this?
I don't have so many fears. Outside of the concrete fears that I have for people that surround me, that are dear to me. During this pandemic, I have had people close to me that died, and others that were born very close to me that exited the uterus of their mother, and others who died. Oddly, however, I have a kind of conviction, a confidence in the power of life. When I say power of life, I mean that life continues in the way that weeds grow in between that persist, I see, of course, that what is very complex is the uncertainty with regards to time. Rabih and I have experienced this when we were kids. We were always told that the war would end in 3 months, and then 3 months and the next 3 months added up to 9 years. So this relationship to time, where you think this will end in 6 months, 12 months, you stop believing these kinds of sentences. So you gain a rather detached relationship to time. You only know for a fact that things will evolve and that the essential things persist. Theater will persist. I don't know in what shape, I don't know how I will be doing it in 3 years, but I know that this power of life is there and that it's powerful. And this awareness of people close to me that are dead and those that are born is a powerful metaphor for the things that will happen to me. Some things will die in me, and other things that I don't know of yet will be born in my relationship to myself and in my relationship to others. And to conclude, I don't have a blind optimism, but it's an optimism that I have been given. I am pervaded by a feeling that something will not stop. I'm incapable to say what it is, but something will continue, and we participate in this. The fact that we are having this exchange right now means that we're participating in the energy of this thing that will not cease. To conclude maybe with a word on solidarity that touches me a lot, it has led me to think of a text that has been very important to me, from Czech philosopher Jan Patočka, who was asking himself at some point, how can two people who are separated by everything be brought close to each other? People who hate each other, who shoot at each other. And Patočka was asking this question, what kind of solidarity could bring them together? He said, solidarity of artists? No, they're not artists. That of intellectuals? Neither. And there he develops a concept that I think is very beautiful and truthful. It's the solidarity of the shaken, those who have been shook in their everyday lives through the fear that they have of the day and the night. And Jan Patočka says, we are all people that have been shaken. We all form the solidarity of the shaken. And we need to invest our lives entirely in that fear in order to not betray the solidarity of the shaken. Because if we are looking for comfort, if we are retreating, if we don't participate, we suddenly become people who are cornered, who hide in the back while others are dying. So the question that we can ask ourselves is, how can I serve with this thing that has shaken me? How can I serve others? By opening the rehearsals, by continuing to create in this place where we are, by assuming our responsibilities, and I'm coming back to this, by not betraying the language that is ours, by not changing our language, and by rendering it even more very powerful, even more impactful, to have the solidarity of those that have been shaken, and we have all been shaken at the moment.
I'm grateful that you are pointing this out, and I'm sure tomorrow there will be a debate at 5 p.m. on the Revolt of Dignity with Luca Casarini, Lorenzo Marsili, and Ivan Sagnier. And this will be one of the topics we will try to pick up tomorrow at that talk. Now at 7, we will see the movie, the making of Milo's production, Orestes in Mosul. For all those that are watching on Facebook, you have to switch to the webpage of Akademie der Künste Berlin, which is www.adk.de, because otherwise, you know, Facebook questions of distribution, we had that on the first night, is a complex issue. And there will be an after talk to this screening of the movie. And there will be Daniel Desmoustiers, the director of this making of documentation of your work. There will be 3 people who participated in the project: Susanna Abdulmajid, Khalid Ravi, and Sardar Abdullah. And cultural theorist Klaus Teveleit is joining, and the conversation will be hosted by my 2 colleagues, Eline Banken and Kasia Wojcik, who are also curators of the School of Resistance. And as you know, this, the School of Resistance is somehow quite classical. It's like television. The program is running. You have to see it while it's announced. And I think it's also quite nice that we come back in these times of pandemic to such a classical form. Don't do the on-demand thing. There's a set time when you're invited to join, and then we are gathered as a decentralized audience. For me, the last thing to say now is to thank all of you, Rabih, Milo, Lia, Wajdi, merci, obrigado, and thank you.
Ciao. Thank you.
Shukra.
Ciao.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
See you soon.
Goodbye.